A mafia boss publicly humiliated her best friend. So she walked straight through the crowd and slapped him across the face. He could have destroyed her life in one phone call. Instead, he said, "Finally, someone brave." The Harbor City Food Festival was the kind of event that made people forget their problems. Hundreds of food stalls lined the waterfront. The smell of grilled skewers, warm bread, and spiced sauces floated through the afternoon air. Children ran between vendors. Couples shared plates. Street musicians played something cheerful near the fountain. Maren Cole was not enjoying any of it. She was on her feet, as always, carrying 2 trays of sample cups through the crowd for the diner's pop-up stall. Her apron was stained with mango chutney. Her ponytail was half collapsed, and her best friend Talia had wandered off again, probably distracted by the dessert section 3 rows down. Classic Talia. Maren smiled despite herself and kept moving. Then she heard the voice. It didn't belong to the festival. It was too controlled, too cold, the kind of voice that expected silence the moment it spoke. "Bring her forward." Maren stopped. 20 feet ahead, the crowd had parted like water around a stone. At the center stood Cassian Voss, and even if you'd never seen him before, you knew immediately that this man was not someone you approached casually. He was tall, dressed in a charcoal suit that had no business existing at a food festival. His dark hair swept back, jaw sharp enough to cut glass. 2 men in black flanked him like statues, and in front of him, arms grabbed by a third man, was Talia. Maren's trays hit the ground. She was seen near the display case. One of the bodyguards announced loudly, making sure the crowd heard every word. "The watch is missing. She's the only one who had access." Talia's face was pale. Her mouth was open, but no sound came out. She looked the way people look when something so unfair happens that their brain simply refuses to process it. "I didn't. I never even touched." "We'll sort it out privately," Cassian said, calm as a man ordering coffee. He barely glanced at Talia. He was already turning away, already done with her, already decided. That was the part that made something snap inside Maren's chest. Not the accusation, not even the bodyguard's hand wrapped around her friend's arm. It was the dismissal, the complete, effortless assumption that Talia didn't deserve a response, a question, or a single moment of doubt. Maren pushed through the crowd. People stepped aside, not because she commanded it, but because something in her face told them clearly that she was not stopping. She was not a tall woman. She was not a striking woman, at least not in the way Harbor City rewarded. She was soft-figured, ordinary-faced, flour sometimes still under her fingernails at the end of a shift. But she moved through that crowd like a woman who had decided the outcome of the next 60 seconds and simply hadn't told anyone yet. She stepped directly between Cassian and Talia. He looked down at her mildly. Barely. "Move," he said. "She didn't take anything," Maren said. "I'm not speaking to you." "I know, I'm speaking to you." She held his gaze. "Talia has been standing at our stall for the last 2 hours. I know because I handed her cups to pour every 20 minutes. If a watch disappeared from your display case, look somewhere else." Something flickered in Cassian's expression. Not anger, more like mild interest, the way you'd look at an unusual insect. "My security reviewed the footage. Then review it again." The silence that followed felt enormous. The crowd around them had stopped pretending to do anything else. Every phone in a 10-meter radius was recording. Nobody moved. Even the bodyguards looked uncertain, not because Maren was threatening, but because nobody spoke to Cassian Voss this way. It simply didn't happen. Cassian tilted his head slightly. "You're very confident for someone who doesn't know what they're talking about. And you're very confident for someone who hasn't actually checked his facts." He studied her for one long moment. Then he nodded to his head of security. A quiet instruction, nothing dramatic, and the man stepped away, pressing a finger to his earpiece. 15 seconds passed, then 30. Then the security chief returned, leaned toward Cassian, and said something very quietly. Cassian's expression didn't change. That was the strangest part. His face remained perfectly still, like a man who had trained himself never to show the cost of being wrong. He looked at Talia. "You're free to go," he said simply. The crowd exhaled. The bodyguard released Talia's arm. She stumbled slightly, and Marin caught her, squeezing her hand hard. "It's okay. You're okay." But Marin wasn't finished. She turned back to Cassian, and before logic or self-preservation could stop her, her palm connected with his cheek. Sharp, clean, loud enough that the nearest 10 people visibly flinched. The sound ricocheted through the stunned silence like a stone dropped into still water. Nobody breathed. The 2 bodyguards moved instantly, hands going to their jackets. Cassian raised one finger. They stopped. He turned his face slowly back to Marin. A red mark was already blooming along his jaw. His eyes met hers, dark, unreadable, and completely, unnervingly calm. Then slowly, he smiled. Not a smirk, not the smile of a man planning revenge, something almost genuine, something almost surprised. "Finally," he said quietly, so that only she could hear it. "Someone brave." Marin stared at him. Her heart was slamming against her ribs. Every rational instinct she owned was screaming at her about what she had just done and who she had just done it to. But Cassian Voss simply straightened his jacket, turned, and walked away through the parted crowd. Unhurried, unbothered, like a man who had just found something interesting in an otherwise ordinary day. And as Marin stood there, hands still tingling, Talia gripping her arm with white knuckles, she noticed something. He glanced back once, not at the crowd, not at his security team, at her. And somehow that single glance felt more dangerous than everything that had just happened. The slap was everywhere by morning. 7 different angles, 7 different phones. Someone had even added dramatic orchestral music to one version before uploading it. By midnight, Harbor City Waitress vs. Mafia Boss was trending across every local platform, and by sunrise, people Marin had never met were stopping outside the diner window to point at her. She hated every second of it. Marin arrived at work an hour early, tied her apron tight, and did what she always did when life became too loud. She cooked. Eggs, toast, hash browns, coffee. The familiar rhythm of the morning rush was the only normal thing left in her world, and she held on to it with both hands. Talia arrived at 8, still shaken but trying to hide it behind a bright smile. "You're famous," she said, sliding onto the counter stool. "I'm in danger," Marin corrected flatly, refilling the napkin holders without looking up. "There's a difference. He let you walk away. He let me walk away yesterday." She finally looked at Talia. "That doesn't mean anything." But the morning passed quietly. No black cars, no phone calls, no men in suits appearing at the door. By the lunch rush, Marin had almost convinced herself that Cassian Voss had simply filed her under irrelevant and moved on. Then the black car arrived. It parked directly across the street at 2:14 p.m., a vehicle so expensive it looked uncomfortable existing near a diner. A man in a dark suit stepped out, crossed the street, without hurrying, and placed a small white envelope on the counter in front of Marin without a word. She stared at it. "I'm not touching that," she said. The man left without responding. Talia immediately reached for it. "Don't!" Marin started. Too late. Talia had already slid out the card inside. A single line, handwritten. "I'd like to speak with you. CV." Below it, an address. Voss Tower, the tallest building in Harbor City's financial district, where the top 3 floors reportedly didn't appear on any official building registry. Marin tore the card in half, dropped it in the bin beneath the counter, and went back to work. The next morning, Cassian came himself. No bodyguards, no dramatic entrance. He simply walked into the diner at 7:45 a.m., when it was still half empty, sat down at the corner table and waited. Marin saw him the moment she turned from the coffee machine. Her stomach dropped somewhere near the floor. Every customer in the diner noticed simultaneously. Conversations died. Forks paused mid-air. She walked over slowly, order pad in hand, because if she was going to have this conversation, she was going to have it on her terms. "We don't serve revenge here," she said. Something shifted in his expression, not quite amusement, but close. "Coffee," he said, black. She poured it. She didn't sit down. He reached into his jacket and placed an envelope on the table, thicker this time. "For Talia," he said, "a formal written apology and financial compensation for the distress caused." Marin looked at the envelope, then at him. "What do you want?" "To explain. You accused an innocent woman in front of hundreds of people." "I know," he said it, without defense, without softness either. Just fact, and I was wrong. But the accusation didn't come from me, not originally. He wrapped both hands around the coffee cup. Someone inside my organization created the evidence, planted it, made certain Talia would be in the wrong place at exactly the right time. Marin studied his face, searching for the performance, for the manipulation she'd expected from a man like him. She didn't find it, which made her more suspicious, not less. Why would someone do that to distract me? His jaw tightened slightly. While I was dealing with the public embarrassment, 3 separate operations were accessed by people who shouldn't have been anywhere near them. Money moved, information transferred. Someone has been quietly dismantling things from the inside for months. He paused. The watch was theater. The real theft happened while everyone was watching the festival. Marin sat down without meaning to. She'd expected threats. She'd expected a man covering his reputation. She had not expected this. A carefully controlled man describing something that looked unmistakably like fear, not of her, of something much larger. "Why are you telling me this?" she asked. "Because you noticed something in 30 seconds that my security team missed entirely." He met her eyes. "You looked at the situation and you saw what was real. Most people, even people I pay very well, see what they expect to see." He set the cup down. "I don't need another analyst. I have dozens. I need someone who looks at a room and notices what doesn't belong." The diner hummed quietly around them. Someone's toast popped. A child laughed near the window. "I'm a waitress," Marin said slowly. "I know what you are," Cassian replied. And somehow the way he said it carried no dismissal, only something that sounded uncomfortably like respect. "That's exactly why I'm here." Marin looked at the envelope on the table, at the man across from her who ran half the city's shadows and had shown up alone to a diner with a written apology. She didn't say yes, but she'd say no either. And Cassian Voss, who was very good at reading rooms, noticed. Marin told herself it was just one evening. That was the deal she made with herself, standing in front of her bathroom mirror, dressed in the only semi-formal outfit she owned. A deep green dress she'd bought for her cousin's wedding 2 years ago and never worn since. She wasn't doing this for Cassian. She wasn't doing this because his story had gotten under her skin or because she'd spent the last 2 days thinking about what he'd said. She was doing it for Talia, to make sure the apology was genuine, to make sure this was finished. One evening, that's all. The Children's Hospital Charity Gala was held in the Grand Meridian Ballroom, the kind of venue where the flower arrangements cost more than Marin's monthly rent. Women in gowns that probably had names moved through the crowd. Men in perfectly fitted tuxedos laughed too loudly at things that weren't funny. Marin walked in feeling like a library book accidentally shelved in a jewelry store. Cassian met her at the entrance. No dramatic greeting. He simply fell into step beside her, handed her a glass of water, not champagne, which she noted, and said quietly, "You look uncomfortable." "I am uncomfortable," she said. Good. Uncomfortable people pay attention. He guided her gently toward the main hall. Comfortable people see nothing. She wanted to argue with that. She couldn't, because he was right. The evening began with speeches, a silent auction, and a parade of Harbor City's wealthiest citizens performing generosity for each other. Maren stood slightly apart from Cassian's circle, watching the room the way she watched the diner during a busy Saturday shift. Tracking movement, patterns, things slightly out of place. It didn't take long. Near the east corridor, a woman in catering uniform was moving too slowly. Not lazily, deliberately. She was timing something. Her eyes kept cutting toward a heavy-set man near the bar, one of the guests, but wearing his name badge slightly too high, the way someone would if they'd just clipped it on and hadn't adjusted it yet. Maren leaned slightly toward Cassian. The woman by the corridor, gray uniform. He didn't look immediately. What about her? She's stopped refilling glasses. She's been standing in the same 12-foot stretch for 9 minutes. She keeps looking at the man in the blue tie near the bar. Now Cassian looked. His expression remained neutral, but something behind his eyes sharpened. He arrived with the Delmore Group, he said quietly. His name is supposedly Richard Hatch, regional donor. He clipped his badge on in the last 10 minutes, Maren said. You can see the lanyard hasn't settled, and he hasn't touched his drink. A beat of silence. Then the woman in the catering uniform adjusted her tray, walked a slow arc around the edge of the room, and for just 2 seconds, barely long enough to notice, she and the man called Richard Hatch passed close enough to exchange something small. A folded envelope, palm to palm, gone before most people's eyes would have registered the movement. Maren watched Cassian's jaw tighten. That's Marcus Frey's courier, he said, almost to himself. Marcus Frey, even Maren knew that name. The biggest rival faction in the city. He shouldn't be within 3 districts of anything connected to me. Then someone invited him, Maren said. She watched him process that. Watched the thought land and spread like cold water. Someone on his guest list. Someone who knew this event. Someone close enough to arrange access without triggering his security checks. The traitor wasn't just inside his organization. They were in this room tonight. Cassian made one quiet call. Within minutes, 2 of his men had positioned themselves near both exits without causing a single ripple in the evening's surface. The exchange was photographed. The man called Richard Hatch would not leave the building without being followed. He turned back to Maren. For a moment, he simply looked at her. You spotted that in under 10 minutes, he said. I notice people, she said, simply. When you carry plates for 7 years, you learn who's actually hungry and who's just pretending to eat. Something in his expression shifted, not softening exactly, but opening, like a window in a room that hadn't had fresh air in a long time. As the evening moved into its second hour, the formal program began. Children from the hospital ward were brought in briefly. Maren watched Cassian cross the room toward them without announcement. No photographer followed. No one from his team moved with him. He crouched down to a small boy sitting alone near the stage stairs, visibly terrified by the crowd. Said something. Made the boy laugh. A real sudden laugh that seemed to surprise the child himself. Then he straightened, rejoined his people, and said nothing about it. Maren stood very still. She had walked into this evening carrying a clear picture of who Cassian Voss was. Every story she'd ever heard, every rumor, every headline, none of them included that. She didn't say anything to him about it. He clearly hadn't done it to be seen. But as they left the gala an hour later, the city lights reflecting across the wet pavement outside, she found herself quietly, reluctantly, reconsidering everything. One evening, she had told herself, the problem was, it hadn't felt like enough. The address didn't come from Cassian. That was the first thing Maren told herself when she found it. scrawled on a torn piece of paper tucked beneath the windshield wiper of her car. 3 days after the gala. No name, no explanation. Just a street number in the old waterfront district and a single line beneath it. Ask him about Delia Marsh. Marin sat in her car for a long time, paper in hand, telling herself to throw it away. She drove to the address instead. The old waterfront district was the part of Harbor City that the tourist maps didn't include. Streets that smelled like salt and old timber. Buildings that had survived 3 rounds of redevelopment by simply refusing to be interesting enough to demolish. The address led her to a narrow building sandwiched between a closed laundry and a hardware store. 4 floors, peeling paint, a window box on the 2nd floor with flowers in it that someone clearly tended with care. She knocked. The woman who opened the door was perhaps 70, small-framed, with white hair pulled back simply, and hands that shook slightly when she gripped the doorframe. Her eyes were sharp, though. The kind of sharp that doesn't come from intelligence alone, but from a lifetime of watching people, carefully and surviving what she saw. "You're not who I expected," the woman said. "I'm not sure I'm who anyone expects," Marin replied. "Are you Delia Marsh?" A pause. Then the woman stepped back and opened the door wider. The apartment inside was small but spotlessly kept. Photographs covered one entire wall. A younger Delia, a man with a wide smile and carpenter's hands. Children and grandchildren layered across decades. A life carefully documented. On the kitchen table sat an envelope, already open, already read, with a bank transfer receipt folded inside. Marin recognized the account number format. She'd seen similar paperwork at Voss Tower. "He sends one every month," Delia said, following Marin's gaze. She lowered herself into a chair slowly, with the practiced care of someone whose body had become unreliable. "Has done for 11 years. Always anonymous. But I've known for a long time where it comes from." Marin sat down across from her. "Why?" Delia was quiet for a moment, not hesitating, gathering. "My husband's name was George," she said finally. "He was a dock supervisor, honest man. Stubborn as anything, but honest." Her fingers traced the edge of the envelope. 11 years ago, a young Cassian Voss was in the middle of taking control of operations along the southern waterfront. He wasn't who he is now. He was reckless, hungry, making decisions fast and thinking about consequences later. Marin stayed very still. There was a confrontation, a rival group. George was working a night shift and was simply in the wrong place. Delia's voice didn't break. It had the flatness of grief that has been carried so long it no longer surprises the person holding it. He wasn't targeted. He wasn't involved in anything. But he didn't come home that night, and the reason he didn't traced back to choices Cassian made. The apartment felt very quiet. "He came to me," Delia continued, 6 months after. "Showed up at my door. No bodyguards, no lawyers, no envelope of money to make himself feel better. Just a young man who looked like he hadn't slept properly since it happened." She looked up at Marin. He didn't make excuses. He didn't explain himself. He just said he was sorry, and that he understood if I never wanted to see him again. "But you did see him again," Marin said quietly. "Every few months for the first 2 years. Then less often. But the transfers never stopped." Delia tilted her head. "He paid for my daughter's university, my grandson's surgery 3 years ago. Never asked for gratitude. Never used it to feel better about himself publicly." Her eyes held Marin steadily. "That's not a guilty man buying silence. That's a man trying to carry something responsibly because he can't undo it." Marin drove back toward the city slowly, windows down despite the cold. She thought about the boy at the gala stairs, about the written apology delivered without cameras, about a man who had shown up alone to a diner and said I was wrong without dressing it up. She didn't excuse what he was. She wasn't naive enough for that. But she was beginning to understand the difference between who Cassian Voss appeared to be and who he was when nobody was building a story around him. Her phone buzzed, a message from an unknown number. No greeting, no context, just an image attachment. She opened it. Her own face looked back at her, taken from a distance, outside Delia's building, getting into her car. The timestamp read 40 minutes ago. Her blood went cold. A second image loaded beneath it. Her and Cassian leaving the gala. Her and Cassian at the diner. Compiled, organized, sent to someone with purpose. The message beneath the images was 4 words. She knows too much. Marin's hands tightened on the steering wheel. Whoever was dismantling Cassian's empire from the inside had just shifted their attention, and they had found her first. Marin didn't tell Cassian about the photographs. Not immediately. She spent 1 full day convincing herself it was a scare tactic, something designed to make her step back, go home, return to her apron and her morning shifts, and forget any of this had happened. It was working, mostly. She'd packed a bag that evening without fully admitting to herself that she was packing a bag. Then her car window shattered at 6 a.m. No one on the street, no alarm triggered, just a clean, precise break, the kind that didn't come from a stray stone or a careless pedestrian. Something deliberate. Something that said, "We know where you park." She called Cassian before she'd fully decided to. He arrived in 12 minutes. She didn't ask how he got there so fast. He looked at the window, looked at her face, and didn't ask unnecessary questions. He simply said, "Get your bag," and she didn't argue. The convoy left the city within the hour, 3 vehicles rotating positions, taking a route that Marin noticed changed twice without explanation. She sat in the middle car beside Cassian, bag at her feet, watching the city thin out into highway, and the highway climb into mountain roads she'd never had reason to travel before. She told him about the photographs then. All of it. Delia's address, the anonymous note, the images sent to her phone, the 4-word message. Cassian listened without interrupting. That was something she'd noticed about him. He never filled silence impatiently. He let information finish arriving before he touched it. When she was done, he was quiet for a long moment. "You went to see her alone," he said finally. Not accusatory. Something quieter than that. "The note didn't come from you," Marin said, "which means someone wanted me to find her. I needed to know why before I told you anything." He looked at her. "And what did you decide? That whoever sent me there wanted to rattle you through me? Show you that your private life isn't private anymore?" She paused. "It also means they've been watching you long enough to know about Delia. That's not new surveillance. That's someone who's been close to you for years." Something moved across his face, a shadow she was starting to recognize. Not anger. Something heavier, the particular weight of suspecting someone you trusted. Before he could respond, the car jolted. Sharp, violent. The driver's voice came immediately. 2 words, completely flat. "Contact." Left. Everything happened in the space of a breath. The vehicle behind them swung wide to block the road. The lead car accelerated. Marin heard it before she understood it. A sound like the world tearing slightly at the seams, rapid and rhythmic, and then the rear window of their car spiderwebbed into 1,000 pieces, held together by film alone. Cassian pulled her down below the window line in one motion, his arm across her back, his voice in her ear, "Stay down. Don't move." And she pressed her face against the leather seat and focused on breathing because her body had made the decision to panic and her mind was refusing to let it. The convoy didn't stop. It accelerated hard, taking a sharp service road that threw Marin sideways against the door. She heard the driver coordinating through an earpiece, clipped, precise, professional. Cassian stayed low beside her, and she realized his hand was still on her back, not gripping, just there, like an anchor. The sound of pursuit faded after 4 minutes. After 7, the vehicles slowed. After 10, they stopped at a remote lodge, half buried in pine trees, invisible from the road, the kind of place that didn't exist on maps because it wasn't meant to. Marin sat up slowly. Her hands were shaking. She noticed this distantly, the way you notice weather through glass. Cassian was already speaking quietly to his security team, but he kept glancing back at her. Once. Twice. When the team dispersed to secure the perimeter, he came and sat across from her at the lodge's small wooden table. "That was coordinated," he said. "They knew the route." "Which means they knew we were leaving the city," Marin said. Her voice came out steadier than she expected. "Before we left," he nodded slowly. The implication sat between them. The traitor hadn't just accessed financial records or meeting schedules. They had real-time information. Someone in his inner circle, someone who had known within the hour that Cassian had picked Marin up, had made a call. Marin looked at him across the table. In the low light of the lodge, stripped of the city and the suits and the careful distance he maintained in public, Cassian looked different. Not smaller, never smaller, but more exposed, like a building seen without its scaffolding for the first time. "You're afraid," she said, not cruelly, just honestly. He didn't deny it, which surprised her more than anything he'd said or done so far. He looked at the table for a moment, then back at her. "Not for myself," he said quietly. The words landed softly. Too softly, the kind of softly that rearranges something small but permanent inside your chest. Marin looked away first. Outside the lodge window, the pine trees stood dark and still against the night sky, and somewhere beyond them, someone was willing to burn everything down. She just didn't yet know who. They stayed at the lodge for 2 days, not comfortably, not peacefully, but safely, which was the only currency that mattered now. Cassian's team swept the perimeter every 4 hours. Nobody used phones without encryption. The lodge had no registered owner, no digital footprint, no reason to exist on anyone's radar. Marin used the time to think. She borrowed a notepad from the lodge's kitchen drawer and sat at the wooden table each morning with coffee, writing down everything she'd observed since the festival. Not feelings, not impressions, facts, sequences, things that didn't line up. On the second morning, Cassian sat across from her and watched her work without speaking. After a while, he said, "What are you doing?" "The same thing I do during a double shift," she said, not looking up. "Figuring out what's out of order before it becomes a problem." He was quiet for a moment, and she turned the notepad toward him. She'd drawn a simple timeline. Every incident since the festival, mapped in order. The false accusation against Talia, the charity gala exchange, the photographs outside Delia's building, the highway ambush, connected by a single thread she'd drawn in red pen down the center of the page. "Every single one of these happened within hours of a meeting," she said. "The accusation at the festival, you had a closed briefing that morning. The gala, your team knew your attendance 3 days in advance. The ambush, we left the city within an hour of a conversation inside your tower." She tapped the red line. "Someone isn't just close to you. Someone is in every room." Cassian stared at the timeline. She watched him move through it, the careful, controlled way he processed things, like a man who had trained himself to think before he reacted, because reacting badly had cost him before. Then he went very still. "The Delmore meeting," he said quietly. Marin looked up. 4 days before the festival, closed session, only 6 people in that room. His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "I announced the charity gala attendance in that meeting, and the convoy route yesterday. I discussed it the night before with my operations team. 4 of those same 6 people were present. 4 people. 1 traitor." Marin watched him work through the names. She could see it. The way his expression moved through each face like a man walking carefully through a room he used to know in the dark, suddenly unsure of the furniture. Silas was in both meetings, she said carefully. The name landed like something dropped from height. Silas Crow. She'd seen him twice at Voss Tower, a broad, quiet man in his 50s with gray at his temples, and the unhurried manner of someone who had spent decades earning a specific kind of trust. He didn't look like a traitor. He looked like someone's dependable uncle. Which was, Marin thought, rather the point. Cassian said nothing for a long moment. Silas has been with me for 14 years, he said finally. The words came out flat, not defensive, just the specific flatness of someone reading aloud, something they cannot believe is written. I know, Marin said. He built half of what I have. He was there before any of this was. He stopped. I know, she said again more quietly. She didn't push. She let the silence do its work, because some truths needed space to settle before they could be examined. Cassian stood and moved to the window. Pine trees, cold light, nothing useful to look at. But people moved away from tables when information became too heavy to sit with. His team spent the next 18 hours pulling records, quietly, carefully, leaving no trail that would alert anyone inside the organization. What they found came back in pieces, each one individually explainable, collectively devastating. Payments routed through shell accounts that traced back after 6 careful layers to Marcus Frey's network, the same network whose courier Marin had spotted at the gala. Calendar data accessed from an internal device, registered to Silas's credentials at times when Silas was supposedly elsewhere. A secondary phone, prepaid, untraceable, purchased 3 streets from Silas's apartment building 11 months ago. 11 months. The betrayal hadn't started with the festival. It hadn't started with the watch, or the courier, or the highway ambush. It had started nearly a year ago, quietly from the inside, a slow and patient dismantling by someone who knew exactly where every load-bearing wall was. Marin sat with the full picture and felt something cold move through her. He wasn't stealing from you, she said when Cassian returned to the table. The reports spread between them. He was collapsing you, piece by piece, slowly enough that by the time you noticed the structure failing, you wouldn't be able to find the cause. Cassian looked at the documents, at 11 months of careful destruction wearing the face of loyalty. The accusation against Talia, he said slowly, that wasn't about the watch. No, Marin said. It was about you, public embarrassment, distraction. While you were managing the fallout, 3 operations were accessed. She paused. And while you were chasing the festival story, he moved money, a lot of it. He used my reputation against me. He used your blind spot, Marin said. He knew you'd never suspect the person you trusted most. Cassian looked at her then, really looked at her, in the way that had nothing to do with strategy or observation, or whatever careful usefulness he'd assigned to her at the beginning of all this. If you hadn't slapped me at that festival, he said quietly, none of this surfaces. He walks away clean. Marin said nothing, because she was thinking about a torn piece of paper left on her windshield. An anonymous note leading her to Delia, a trail designed to be followed. Someone had wanted this found. The question that kept her awake that night wasn't who the traitor was. It was, who else knew? The note on the windshield had been bothering Marin for days. Not the message itself. She'd made peace with what it led her to. What bothered her was the handwriting. She'd looked at it long enough before tearing it apart in her mind that she could still see it clearly. Neat, precise. The kind of handwriting that belonged to someone who'd been taught penmanship properly a long time ago. She mentioned it to Cassian on the morning they prepared to return to the city. He went very quiet. Describe it exactly, he said. She did. The particular curl on the capital D. The way the numbers sat slightly above the line, like the writer pressed harder on letters than digits. Cassian picked up his phone and made a single call. 40 seconds. He hung up and stood motionless for a moment, facing the window. "That's not Silas's handwriting," he said. Marin felt the floor shift slightly beneath the conversation. "Then someone else left that note," she said carefully. "Someone who knew about Delia, who knew about Silas, who wanted us to find the trail, but didn't want to be the one to hand it to us directly." "Someone inside who isn't the traitor," Cassian said. "Someone who suspected Silas but couldn't come forward." They looked at each other across the lodge table. The conspiracy had a witness, and that witness had chosen Marin, a stranger, an outsider, someone with nothing to lose and no allegiance to protect, as the safest possible messenger. They returned to the city carefully, using a different route, different vehicles. Cassian's team had identified 3 of the shell accounts overnight and quietly frozen 2. Silas didn't know yet. The plan was controlled exposure, gather everything, move simultaneously, give him no window to run. It was a good plan. Silas didn't give them time to use it. Marin was alone when it happened. Cassian had gone to Voss Tower for 2 hours, unavoidable, carefully arranged, his security team present. Marin had insisted on returning to her apartment. She needed clean clothes, her own space, 20 minutes of something that felt like her actual life. 2 of Cassian's men waited outside in a car. She was pulling a jacket from her closet when the power went out. Not the building, just her apartment. A single, targeted cut. She reached for her phone. It wasn't on the counter where she'd left it. She turned, and the man was already in the room. Not Silas. Someone she didn't recognize, which was somehow worse. Professional, efficient. He crossed the distance before she could process the decision to run. And then there was a cloth and the smell of something chemical, and the world tilted sideways and kept going. She woke up cold. Concrete floor. No windows, the smell of rust and machine oil, and something that had been wet and dried many times. Distant sounds, metal on metal, the low groan of old structure shifting. An abandoned building near water. Her hands were zip-tied in front of her, which was a small mercy. Whoever had arranged this was confident, not sadistic. Then Silas Crow walked in. He looked exactly the same. Gray temples, unhurried manner, the dependable uncle. Except now that Marin knew what she was looking at, she could see the architecture beneath the surface. The careful pleasantness of a man who had spent 14 years making sure no one looked past it. "I want you to know," he said, pulling a chair across the concrete with a sound that set Marin's teeth on edge, "that this was not my preference. Kidnapping rarely is," Marin said. Her voice came out steadier than she had any right to expect. Something flickered across his face. Mild surprise quickly filed away. "You've caused a significant problem," he said, "for someone with no stake in any of this." "My friend had a stake," Marin said. "That was enough." Silas studied her the way people studied things they found inconvenient. "A waitress," he said quietly, almost to himself. 11 months of planning, 4 separate organizations coordinated, and it unravels because of a waitress at a food festival. "And a slap," Marin said. He almost smiled. "Almost. Cassian is sentimental," Silas said, and the word carried genuine contempt beneath its casual surface. "He always was. I built half his empire, and he never once asked how, only celebrated that it was done. But sentiment makes a man predictable. I knew eventually someone would walk in and make him feel something, and he'd stop thinking clearly. So this was always going to end like this," Marin said. "You were always going to run." After I finished, he leaned forward slightly. "The last transfer's complete tonight. By morning, I'm beyond any jurisdiction Cassian can reach." He paused. "You weren't supposed to exist in this story, Marin. You made yourself a problem." "Where is he?" she asked. Silas tilted his head. "Cassian?" A short breath, not quite a laugh. Looking for you in every wrong place. I made sure of that. But even as he said it, Marin noticed something. The distant sounds had changed. The metal on metal had stopped. The structural groaning had stopped. The particular quality of silence outside had shifted from empty to held. The silence of people staying still on purpose. She looked at Silas. He hadn't noticed yet. You said I wasn't supposed to exist in this story, she said, keeping her voice level, keeping his attention on her face. But I think that's the thing about stories. She held his gaze. They don't end when you decide. The doors blew open. The next 4 minutes were chaos. Cassian's team moved through the abandoned rail yard like water, finding every crack simultaneously, precise, overwhelming, leaving no exit untested. Silas's men, positioned at 3 points around the building, lasted approximately 90 seconds before they were disarmed and on their knees on the concrete. Silas himself didn't run. That was the thing Marin noticed first, even through the noise and the cold and the zip ties still biting into her wrists. He stood up from his chair slowly, straightened his jacket with both hands, and waited. Like a man who had already done his accounting and found it balanced. Like someone who had known, somewhere beneath all the planning, that it would end in a room like this. Cassian came through the far door last. He always entered last. Marin had noticed that about him. Let the room be secured first. Let other people confirm it was safe. Not cowardice, the opposite. The discipline of a man who understood that he was too important to the operation to be the first one through an unknown door. But tonight he moved differently. He cleared the doorway and his eyes found Marin before they found Silas. One sweep, checking her face, her posture, her hands, cataloging damage. When he confirmed she was upright and breathing and fundamentally intact, something in his shoulders released by a fraction that probably only she was close enough to notice. Then he looked at Silas. The two men regarded each other across 15 feet of cold concrete. 14 years occupied the space between them. Marin could almost see the weight of it. The meetings, the decisions, the quiet moments of trust extended and accepted between two people building something together. She thought about what Silas had said. I built half his empire. The pride underneath the contempt. The bitterness of a man who had felt invisible inside his own achievement. Silas, Cassian said. Just the name. Nothing attached to it. Cassian. Silas tilted his head slightly, faster than I expected. She kept you talking, Cassian said. Silas glanced at Marin. Something complicated moved across his face. Yes, he said. She did. One of Cassian's men stepped forward with a tablet, the financial records, the surveillance footage, the testimony from 2 of Silas's own couriers who had made separate deals within the last 6 hours. The full architecture of 11 months laid out cleanly. Silas looked at it without expression. He didn't dispute a single item. Marcus Frey's final transfer clears in 40 minutes. Silas said instead, almost conversationally. You won't be able to recover it after that. Already frozen, Cassian said. A pause. The offshore accounts closed this morning. Something shifted in Silas's face for the first time. Not fear, recalculation. The expression of a chess player realizing the board had been rearranged while he was watching a different game. The witness, he said quietly. Someone warned you earlier than I thought. Does it matter who? Cassian said. Silas was quiet for a moment. Then, unexpectedly, he nodded. A small, genuine nod of concession, the kind that costs something real to give. No, he said, I suppose it doesn't. The moment that followed was the one Marin would think about long afterward. Cassian's hand moved to his jacket. She saw it. The small, controlled movement of a man reaching for something that had been reached for many times before. She saw his team see it too, the way they collectively held still, giving him space, waiting, and she saw his eyes. Not at Silas, at her. She didn't say anything. She didn't shake her head or reach out or make any dramatic gesture. She simply looked back at him, steady, quiet, the way she'd looked at him across a diner counter, what felt like a lifetime ago. The way she'd looked at him when he'd said I was without dressing it up. His hands stilled. He stood motionless for 3 full seconds. Then he withdrew his hand, empty, and turned to his security chief. "Call Detective Harrow," he said. "Tell him we have something he's been looking for." The silence in the room changed texture entirely. His own team exchanged glances, not shocked, but recalibrating, the way people do when someone they thought they understood reveals a dimension they hadn't mapped. Silas stared at him. For the first time all evening, he looked genuinely surprised. "You're handing me to the police," he said. Not a question. Something between disbelief and, strangely, relief. "You'll spend a long time in a room smaller than this one," Cassian said. "That's justice enough." "Since when?" Silas said slowly. "Do you believe in justice?" Cassian looked at him for a long moment. "Since recently," he said. 2 of his men moved Silas toward the exit. He went without resistance, which somehow made the whole thing more complete. Not a defeat that needed forcing, but one that had already been accepted. Cassian crossed the room to Marin and crouched in front of her, producing a small knife to cut the zip ties. Her wrists were red beneath them. He looked at them without speaking, then looked up at her. "You kept him talking," he said quietly. "Someone had to," she said. "You were buying time." "I was also genuinely curious," she admitted. "He had a lot to say about you." Something moved across his face. Not quite amusement. Not quite something else. A combination the English language didn't have a precise word for. "Good things?" he asked. "Complicated things," she said, "which I think might be more accurate anyway." He helped her to her feet. Outside, the city hummed distantly, indifferent, continuous, the sound of a place that moved forward, regardless of what any single person chose within it. She looked at him in the cold industrial light. This man who had just chosen justice over revenge in front of people for whom revenge was the only language they'd ever respected. And she understood, quietly and completely, that something had just changed. Not just for him. 3 months is enough time for a city to forget. Harbor City moved on the way it always did, loudly, hungrily, without sentiment. New headlines replaced old ones. New scandals pushed old names off the front page. The arrest of Silas Crow generated 2 weeks of breathless coverage, then settled into the slow machinery of courts and proceedings that most people found too complicated to follow. Cassian Voss disappeared from the headlines entirely. That was intentional. Marin knew that much. She'd watched him make the decision quietly, without announcement. The way he made most decisions that actually mattered. One by one, the operations that had defined his empire for a decade began closing down. Not loudly, not dramatically, just stops. Doors that had been open for years, gently shut. Many of his associates left, some with anger, some with confusion, some with the specific silence of people who understood more than they said. A smaller number stayed. The ones who had followed him for reasons that had more to do with the man than the business. Marin heard all of this secondhand, because she had left too. Not running, not hiding. She'd simply done the thing she'd been quietly planning for 3 years before a food festival had rearranged the entire architecture of her life. She'd taken her savings, found a small property in a coastal town 2 hours south of Harbor City, and started building. The cafe was small, 8 tables inside, 4 outside on a narrow terrace overlooking the water. She'd painted the exterior herself, a pale blue that looked different depending on the light and the weather, which she liked. The menu was short and honest. The coffee was excellent. The hours were hers. She called it Harbor, not for Harbor City, for the thing a harbor actually was. a place where things arrived safely after difficult journeys. The coastal town was quiet in the way that Harbor City never had been. People here moved at a pace that suggested they'd made peace with time rather than fighting it. Marin woke before sunrise, walked the shoreline before opening, and spent her days doing work she understood with her whole body. She was happy. She was also, if she was honest with herself during the quiet hours, waiting. She didn't examine that too closely. On a Tuesday morning in early autumn, when the sea was gray and the light was the color of old silver, and the cafe had exactly 3 customers, a retired couple sharing a pastry, and a fisherman working through his second coffee, the door opened. Marin had her back to it. She knew anyway. There was a particular quality to certain silences, the way a room adjusted around a presence, the way the air rearranged itself. She'd learned to read it in crowded diners years before she'd ever had a reason to apply it to one specific person. She finished pouring the coffee she was pouring, set the pot down, turned around. Cassian stood just inside the doorway. He looked different, not lesser, never lesser, but lighter, somehow in a way she didn't have an immediate word for. The suit was simpler. The careful distance he used to maintain around himself like a second jacket. That was different too. Not gone, but worn more loosely, like something he was learning to set down in stages. He was holding a small box, dark wood, brass clasp, the size of something that mattered. The retired couple glanced over with mild interest. The fisherman didn't look up from his coffee. Marin leaned against the counter and waited. Cassian walked to the counter slowly. Not the controlled, deliberate walk of a man managing a room, but the walk of someone who was, beneath everything, slightly nervous. She found that she liked that. The nervousness. The fact that he hadn't engineered this moment into something he could control. He set the box on the counter between them. She looked at it, then at him. "If that's another invitation to Voss Tower," she said, "I should tell you the commute has gotten significantly worse." Something broke open in his expression, a real smile, unguarded, the kind she'd only seen him give to a small boy on a gala staircase. "Open it," he said. She lifted the brass clasp. Inside, resting on a bed of dark velvet, was the antique watch. The one that had started everything, the accusation, the slap, the smile, the unraveling of an 11-month conspiracy. She'd assumed it was locked in an evidence room somewhere, tangled in legal proceedings. Instead, it was here, in her hands, restored, every scratch buffed out, the crystal replaced, the movement cleaned and reset to the correct time. Not a relic anymore, not evidence, something made whole again. She stared at it for a long moment. "It took 4 months to restore properly," Cassian said quietly. "The movement was damaged. The restorer said it kept stopping at the same time every day, like it was stuck on a specific moment." He paused. "I told him to fix it, that some things are worth the patience." Marin looked up. He held her gaze, steady, open. None of the careful architecture he used to build between himself and anything that could reach him. "I closed the last operation 2 weeks ago," he said. "There's nothing left of what I was." He glanced around the small cafe, the pale blue walls, the 8 tables, the gray sea visible through the window. "I don't know what I'm building next. I only know I don't want to build it alone." The retired couple weren't pretending not to listen anymore. The fisherman had put his coffee down. Marin looked at the watch in her hands, at the man across the counter, at the ridiculous, improbable chain of events that had begun with Mafia chutney on her apron and ended here, in a small cafe that smelled of good coffee and sea air, with the city's most feared man looking at her like she was the only solid ground he'd found in years. She set the watch carefully on the counter between them. "You'll have to learn how to make coffee," she said. Cassian looked at her. "The machine is complicated," she continued, completely straight-faced, "and I open at 6 every day. including weekends. I'll manage, he said softly. And you'll need an apron. Marin, there's no negotiating on the apron. Marin, his voice was quiet. The single word carrying everything that hadn't been said across all these months. Every careful distance maintained, every wall built, and slowly, unexpectedly dismantled. She smiled, and the woman who had once slapped the city's most feared man in front of hundreds of people, who had stood between power and her friend without a second thought, who had walked into an old woman's apartment and an abandoned rail yard and come out the other side of both with herself intact, reached across the counter and took his hand. Yes, she said simply. Outside, the sea moved against the shore the way it always had. Patient, continuous, indifferent to the smallness of human decisions, and completely unaware that some of them, against all reasonable odds, were exactly right. The watch on the counter ticked steadily, no longer stuck.